Good morning, faithful listeners. You have tuned in to the P40 Ministries podcast, the one place where you can get a daily explanatory Bible reading to start your day strong. This is your host, Jen, bringing you a brand new episode out of Genesis. Hey, faithful listeners, happy Monday. You are listening to the P40 Ministries podcast with your host, Jen. Before we begin today's episode, I am going to let you guys know that this is a continuation episode of the past two episodes. So I definitely recommend listening to Wednesday's episode and Friday's episode as well in order so that you can really understand what I'm talking about in the Bible today. Because I am not giving a recap introduction this time. I'm just going to start reading. So unfortunately, everybody's just going to have to remember where we're at. But I'm going to be reading Genesis chapter 27, verses 30 all the way to the end of the chapter, which is verse 46. I will be reading out of the AMP once again this morning just to finish out this chapter in the AMP version. But of course, you can read out of whatever version you usually prefer and you usually read out of. There is absolutely nothing wrong with reading out of a different version of the Bible. If you are not sure which version you like the best, some of my recommendations are the AMP version is really excellent because it goes straight back to the Greek and the Hebrew. It's a really good and easy to understand translation. I also love the NLT version of the Bible as well. Extremely easy to understand. It's one of my favorite versions of the Bible. And also the NIV version is a very popular version for a reason. It's really easy to understand, and it's a great beginner's Bible and a good version to read if you're not quite sure where to begin. So, faithful listeners, let's grab our cups of coffee and let's go ahead and start reading. Now, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely left the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. Esau also made a delicious dish of meat and brought it to his father and said to him, "Let my father get up and eat some of his son's game so that you may bless me." Isaac his father said to him, Who are you?" And he replied, "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." Then Isaac trembled violently, and he said, "Then who was the one who was just here who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I blessed him. Yes, and he in fact shall be and shall remain blessed." When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with a great and extremely bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." Isaac said, "Your brother came deceitfully and has fraudulently taken away your blessing for himself." Esau replied, "Is he not rightly named Jacob the supplanter? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing. Have you not reserved a blessing even for me?" But Isaac replied to Esau, "Listen carefully. I have made Jacob your lord and master, and have given him all his brothers and relatives as servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. What then can I do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father." Then Esau, no longer able to restrain himself, raised his voice and wept loudly. Then Isaac his father answered and prophesied and said to him, "Your dwelling shall be away from the fertility of the earth, and away from the dew of heaven above. But you shall live by your sword, and serve your brother. However, it shall come to pass when you break loose from your anger and hatred, that you will tear his yoke off your neck, and you will be free of him." So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are very near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." When these words of her elder son Esau were repeated to Rebekah, she sent for Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Listen carefully. Your brother Esau is comforting himself concerning you by planning to kill you. So now, my son, listen and do what I say. Go, escape to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while, until your brother's anger subsides. When your brother's anger towards you subsides and he forgets what you did to him, then I will send and bring you back from there. Why should I be deprived of you both in a single day?" Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I am tired of living because of the daughters of Heth, these insolent wives of Esau. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of Heth, like these daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me?" In verse 30, we now see that Jacob leaves the tent of his father Isaac and deceives Isaac into being blessed instead of Esau. But it says in verse 30 that as soon as he leaves, Esau comes back in from the field and from hunting. And Esau makes some delicious stew for his father and thinks that everything is completely normal. And he goes in and he takes it to his father. And this was probably only about an hour later after Jacob leaves the tent. So it's a very, very short period of time. And so Esau goes into the tent and Isaac's like, who's here, basically? And Esau replies, probably thinking this is a funny question, like I was just here a few hours ago. He's like, "I'm your son, your firstborn Esau." And all of a sudden, Isaac violently starts trembling. And this is an interesting description that the author of Genesis makes, that Isaac trembles violently. So Isaac knew something all of a sudden wasn't quite right. And he starts trembling violently. And he says, "Who was it then that was just here and hunted game and brought it to me?" And he says, "I ate all of it before you came and I blessed him. Yes, and he in fact shall be and shall remain blessed." So Isaac's figuring it out in his head. And he says, "There was somebody here before you, Esau, that came and brought me some of this food that they said that they hunted, and I ate it and I blessed that person." And Isaac's figuring it out that this was Jacob who in fact did deceive him. Isaac is realizing that Jacob, his younger son, had come in and deceived him, and he had given his blessing to Jacob instead of Esau. Now, the blessing was something so important in this time period. This was like a last will and testament. This was basically Isaac would be giving everything pretty much to Jacob through this blessing. Not only giving it to Jacob, but also blessing him and asking God to give a special blessing to Jacob as well, or Esau, who he was hoping was going to get that blessing. Now, the other interesting thing about the fact that Isaac was trembling violently, he's beginning to realize that his plan to bless Esau did not work. He kind of went against God's plan in order to try to bless Esau instead of Jacob. And we know this because Rebekah was promised by God when she had the two twins in her womb that the younger twin would rule over the elder twin. But if you see how Isaac blessed Jacob in the blessing that he gives in verse 29 that we talked about on Friday, it says, "Be Lord and master over your brothers." But Isaac wanted to give that blessing to Esau rather than to Jacob, even though that was directly against God's plan. God's plan was to have Jacob rule over Esau from the very beginning. He knew that that was what's going to happen. So Isaac's realizing this and he's shaking violently, knowing that he's going against God's plan. Now, of course, I don't think that it was really in God's plan for Jacob to deceive his father. That was clearly a sin. That was clearly wrong. But of course, God can use that kind of stuff to fulfill his plans. And that is what God did. It does say in Hebrews that Isaac had faith enough to not give another blessing to Esau. I think the exact verse is, let's see here. The exact verse is Hebrews 11, verse 20. It says, "By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the things to come." So it actually says in the Bible that Isaac had this faith in order to not just recant Jacob's blessing and give it to Esau instead. Isaac believed and knew that this was part of God's plan and that he shouldn't have gone against God's plan in the first place, because here is what Isaac says to Esau in verse 33. Isaac says to Esau, "Yes, and in fact, Jacob shall remain the one who is blessed." Now Esau doesn't want to hear that. And Esau cries with this great and extremely bitter cry. So he's basically throwing a temper tantrum. And Esau is extremely angry because all of Isaac's material possessions belong to Jacob. And Esau is not happy about this. And he says, "Bless even me, Father. Please bless me." And Esau says this as he's crying tears of anger and resentment and frustration towards Jacob. But Isaac says, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away and has fraudulently taken away your blessing for himself." But Esau replies to his father. He starts gossiping and he's like, "Well, his name is Jacob. I mean, he's the supplanter. He has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing." So you remember a few chapters back where Esau had sold his birthright in exchange for some stew that Jacob had made. So Jacob did not technically take away Esau's birthright. It says in the Bible that Esau despised his birthright. He didn't want the spiritual kind of things that went with that birthright. He wanted the material possessions, which is very clear from what he is doing now in Genesis chapter 27. But before, when it was just the spiritual aspect of the birthright, you know, the part where he has to take care of the family and has to make sure that they are following God, and he would technically be the spiritual leader of his family. He didn't want any of that. He despised his birthright. He sold it to Jacob for nothing more than a bit of stew because he was hungry. But now, when the material possessions are in play and Esau's a little bit older, he wants his birthright back all of a sudden. And he's like, you know, Jacob took away my birthright and now he's taking away my blessing also. And he says, his name is rightly Jacob. He is a supplanter. He is a deceiver. And this is what he's saying to Isaac. But it says here in verse 37, and this is where Isaac's faith is coming into play. He says, Isaac replies to Esau, "Listen carefully. I have made Jacob your Lord and master. I have given him all his brothers and relatives as servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. What then can I do for you, my son?" So he believes in God's promise now. He believes that God, in fact, was correct when he said many years prior that Jacob would rule over Esau. Now Isaac is seeing God's plan coming into place, and rather than recanting, like I said earlier, rather than recanting his blessing to Jacob and giving it to Esau instead, he is telling Esau, there is no blessing. I gave it to Jacob. He is the one who is going to rule over you. And Esau, when he hears this, is not able to restrain himself, and he raises his voice and weeps loudly, it says. And these aren't tears of repentance for what he had done with his birthright, how he had sold it to Jacob. No, these are not tears of repentance. These are tears of anger, frustration, selfish ambition. And Hebrews 12:15-17 talks about this as well. If you turn to Hebrews 12, here's what it says. "Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears." So he's seeking this blessing diligently with tears, trying to get Isaac to sympathize with him and get this blessing back. But Isaac instead says, no, I have already given it to Jacob. This was God's will. This was what was going to happen. So instead of giving Esau a blessing, Isaac says, Esau, your dwelling shall be away from the fertility of the earth and away from the dew of heaven above. But you shall live by your sword, and you will serve your brother. However, it shall come to pass when you break loose from your anger and hatred, that you will tear off his yoke from your neck, and you will be free of him. And this is the only blessing that Isaac gives to Esau during all of this. He just pretty much continues to tell Esau that, sorry, this is God's will, and this is what's going to happen. But it says in verse 41 that because of this blessing, Esau hated Jacob because his father blessed Jacob instead of himself. So he says in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are very near, then I will kill my brother Jacob. And what this means is, as soon as dad is dead, I will kill Jacob. But Rebekah finds out about this because Esau must have told somebody, and somehow it got back to Rebekah. So Rebekah says to Jacob, she says, get out of here. Go live with my brother, your uncle Laban, and stay there for a little bit until your dad dies, and I will send for you. And hopefully this will only be a little bit, and you can come back and live here after Esau cools down. So just go so you can be protected from Esau. But in order to get Jacob out of the house, she goes to Isaac, her husband. And Rebekah says, I am so tired and so sick of these women that Esau has married. She's like, my life is miserable because of these women, and they are local women. And I'd rather die than have Jacob marry some of these women. So she says, I want Jacob to return to Laban and to marry someone from that household. So what an interesting chapter this is for sure, and it's talked about in Hebrews quite a bit as well. So this is part of biblical history, a very important part of biblical history, the story of Jacob and Esau. But tomorrow I will be talking about Matthew, so join me tomorrow, 6 a.m., for an episode out of the New Testament where we will be talking more about the life of Jesus. So join me then, 6 a.m. Friends, I want to thank you guys all so much for tuning in. I am going to ask that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Happy listening, and God bless.